I declare war. I declare war.
I declare
war.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us with your families, we hope, or friends, by yourself. However you might be watching with us online, we are in week number 3 of our series called I Declare War, where we're just looking at some tough topics: mental health, anxiety, depression, loneliness, and then today we're going to be talking about suicide, something that is a heavy topic, one that often isn't discussed in church or really just in society.
You know, that's one of the things that I think has even been interesting over the last few weeks are the comments. So thank you so much for talking about this.
Right.
Because it isn't something that we talk about a lot in church.
Absolutely. Actually, when we were posting kind of the update of what we're going to be talking about this week, we had a few comments on Facebook that said, hey, I've experienced a loss by suicide.
Right.
I am looking forward to hearing this message because it's often not talked about. And so we're going to be discussing it. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be tough. And a couple of things we just kind of want to preface. You might be watching and have struggled with thoughts of suicide, or you know someone who has died by suicide, or you're sitting there asking the question, why is this even an issue?
Right, and I think that's part of it. The whole topic runs the whole gamut.
Right.
And I think when you understand, especially what you're going to talk about next, is the stats, is it starts becoming clear why we are talking about this. So.
Absolutely, and that's kind of been the scary, unfortunate, sad thing about this whole series is when you start to look at how this has impacted our world, whether it's loneliness in week 1, depression last week, or today's suicide, the statistics are heartbreaking.
They're scary.
Yeah.
And when you start realizing how prevalent this is, especially in the generations that are coming up,
Right.
It has to make us pause and say, what is going on here, and how can we help? Especially as how can we help as the church?
Right, exactly. And that's our whole goal with I Declare War. This series is to give you the tools to be able to declare war against your own mental health battle or help individuals who are struggling.
Right.
And so just to give you some statistics about suicide, according to WHO, the World Health Organization, 800,000 people globally every single year die by suicide. And now when we hear numbers like that, you know, and you don't put them in a grand scheme of things, 800,000 is still a lot, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But that's one person every 40 seconds.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. So in other terms, by the time we've started filming this, 3 or 4 people have died by suicide.
Right. And this next stat is amazing to me.
This next stat is, it is the second leading cause of death among individuals who are 15 to 29 years old.
It's staggering is
Yeah.
what it is. When you start understanding the stats, it's absolutely staggering.
Yeah, and it's something that we've talked about, really a trend we've talked about is especially mental health is an issue across the board, but especially in those younger generations, it's an issue that's not going away. Because I imagine those 15 to 29-year-olds, what research has shown, because even when you get to 30 to 40-year-olds, it's still high for suicide. Unless this baggage or this pain or mental health issues, unless we start declaring war against them and start getting into a healthier place, it's going to be with us the rest of our lives. But it doesn't always have to be. And even as we were talking, you and I,
We've had a lot of discussions.
We've had a lot of conversations
of this over the last, even honestly, several months.
Yeah, well, we started planning this series 8 or 9 months ago. And the conversations you and I have had, whether it's generationally speaking or about suicide specifically, have been so different because we've grown up in very different times.
We've experienced different things.
Yes. And
Totally.
So why don't you share a little bit, because I'm a part of the younger generation,
Right.
and so we know the statistics for us.
Right.
With you growing up, why don't you share what the discussion was like, if there was any, and what suicide rates were like, or if you could recognize any of them?
I think you were actually amazed when I told you this. There wasn't a discussion for one,
Right.
that I know of,
Right.
and I actually told you we were having this conversation. I said, I don't know of anyone that had taken their own life.
Right.
And then I came back to you, I think a week or two later, said, I did remember a good friend.
After thinking about it.
After thinking about it. I mean, I had to really think about, was there somebody I knew that took their own life? And it wasn't, I think I was in my 40s, mid to late 40s, till I realized, hey, there was a friend of mine that did take his life. So it's a foreign conversation to me. It was something that I didn't have to think about or deal with basically growing up in my younger years.
Right. And so the conversation we're having is coming from 2 different places, but for today's sake, it actually can be really good, because what's been so cool about you, Brad, especially with mental health, is over the last year, you have allowed us to have these conversations in the office that for you is kind of foreign territory.
It is, and I think the thing that we have to be careful about, for those of you who are my age, is that we kind of shove it off because it's not something we've had to deal with. So why is it a big problem?
Right.
These stats make it a big problem.
Right, because what we see when we see these statistics is, if you personally don't know your child or your grandchild,
Exactly.
either
And that's-
knows or struggles themselves.
And that's what scares me. As I look at this, I said, if this is a standard now, what do I need to look for as my grandkids are growing up and things like that? So it's a crucial thing for those of us that maybe have not had to deal with this as much as what it is. And I guess my question back to you is, because I don't understand it, is why is this an option for so many people in the younger generations?
Right, because that's a question that actually came up in one of you and I's first conversation. Is we both wrestled with it, like, I just don't get it.
Right.
Like, I don't understand how somebody can get to that place emotionally,
Right.
where the only option is to take their life, to die by suicide. And here's kind of, as I've processed this question, I think that there are 5 lives that individuals who struggle with thoughts of suicide wrestle with constantly. And I say that word constantly because a lot of people, there's 2 types of suicidal thoughts. There's passive ideation and there's active ideation. Passive ideation is kind of the more passive thoughts, like, hey, I don't want to be here. Man, life is extremely tough right now. What would it be like for me not to be here? Almost all of us experience one or more of those thoughts at least once in our life.
Right.
Like, wow, I just can't do this anymore. But then we get to this active ideation where you're actually planning out
Where
how
you start
would
thinking
do it.
about
Start thinking
what's
about
the process
it. Yeah,
of me being able to do this.
exactly. So when we're in that phase, or more extreme phase, there's 5 lives I think people struggle with. The first one is, I am a mistake. I don't matter. I am a failure. People don't like me. And then number 5, the one that we're going to focus on, is, I am always going to feel this way.
Right. And I think that when I read some of these notes and things, and that was the one that really stuck out to me, is, am I always going to feel this way? Because we all go into these, even if it's not a suicidal thought, we all go into these thoughts of, man, things just aren't working out. Is it
Right.
always going to be like this?
Right.
Is there another hill that I have to go up?
Right.
And so this is just an extreme version of those kind of thoughts.
Yeah, this is what happens. Suicide becomes an option when that point number 5 continues to be an issue, but then we aren't able to push through those thoughts.
Right.
And it's a heartbreaking option that statistically is becoming more and more accessible to the younger generation, but then also individuals who have, served our country. And
Right.
fought overseas, or suicide for them, the statistics are just heartbreaking.
Right.
And so the I'll always feel this way is probably one of the biggest one. That when I talk to people who struggle with thoughts of suicide, that's probably where people struggle the most. And this personally, just to kind of get a little bit personal with this is where I've struggled with a lot of mental health issues. I've wrestled a lot with anxiety and with depression, feelings of loneliness. The first 3,
Right.
2 of the first 3 weeks we've talked about.
And I'll just interject and say, I've been amazed since we started this conversation 8 or 9 months ago, and now we've done this series. The people who are basically coming out of the woodwork,
Right.
saying, "That's me.
Absolutely.
I'm struggling with this. I see it more and more and more all the time. This is
Yeah.
a real thing
Yes.
that we have to deal with."
Yeah.
And I think what's happened in the past, and maybe this is part of the reason why my generation, it wasn't something you could talk about.
Right.
Because it wasn't common. It was, you thought less of yourself, or I wasn't man enough, or I wasn't strong enough if I talked about these kind of things. So I think this conversation is excellent that we're being able to have these conversations.
Absolutely. And if you are declaring war, when we filmed this trailer and we had 13 to 14 individuals come to film the bumper video that we showed at the beginning, how courageous that is for you to declare
Absolutely.
war and say, hey, I have depression, but I'm not my depression.
There is no shame
Right.
in calling this out and saying, yes, this is something that I deal with.
Right. And so with suicide, for me, COVID-19 has caused a lot of physical issues for our country. It's also caused a lot of mental health issues. And I think it's so important that we discuss both of those. And for me personally, I haven't knock on wood, struggled yet with the physical issues, but the mental health battle for COVID-19 was very difficult for me.
Right.
Being in quarantine, being someone who struggles with depression and loneliness was very discouraging. And back in May was actually the first time, I shared this with you and the staff, was the first time I asked myself, do I even want to be here?
Right.
It was, again, one of those passive ideation thoughts. It was nothing more than that, but it was just a brief moment of, if I'm always going to feel this way,
Why bother?
Why bother? What's the point?
Right.
Is a question a lot of us ask. It really kind of just challenged me of, I've got to get out of this.
Right.
I've got to declare war.
So what was your process? Because I think, you being vulnerable and saying, hey, this is something it
Right.
ran through my mind. So how do you get out of those processes, and then how do we talk about people who are really dealing with this? What are some of the steps that they need to do?
Right. So if you are watching right now, if you're listening, or you know someone that struggles with thoughts of suicide, or depression, anxiety, whatever it might be that lead to that as an option, it can be so difficult for you to find the strength to take a healthy step.
Right.
Okay. So I want to recognize that first. But right now I want to give you a little push to say, I get that. I care so much about you. Let's do this together. And so here's what I did. Because I recognized that if I didn't seek help, I was going to be going down a very dark path. I got involved in counseling again, went back to my college counselor, who was just absolutely phenomenal for when my dad passed. And then I got on some medication that, helped me as well. But I didn't just stop there. Something that my counselor helped me recognize is I had to find my will to live, which sounds kind of dark, but
it does, yeah.
As a pastor, especially, what it boiled down to for me was I had to figure out, why do I still do ministry? Mm-hmm. What am I passionate about? To make it a little bit lighter. And it came down to, I love helping hurting people find hope. And that's why I'm so much for mental health awareness, for grief, loss, and suffering awareness, for talking about people who have been oppressed, stuff like that. And once I found that, once I realized that the reason I still want to be here is because I want to help hurting people find hope, it's almost like a switch.
And you have a purpose.
Exactly.
And I think that's one reason why we as a church, we push so much, not only what is your next step, but find what God has wired you for.
Absolutely.
What's your holy discontent? What are the
Yes.
things that make you get up in the morning? Because once you have that purpose,
Right.
and once you have those, hey, this is why I am here, this is how God has wired me, I'm using those gifts and abilities, then life
Absolutely.
opens up.
Right.
And it makes all the difference
It's gonna be incredible.
in the world.
Yeah, and so you might be sitting there and be like, yeah, I struggle with thoughts of suicide. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know my purpose. I think that's one of the most asked questions is, what is my purpose? If that's you and you're wondering kind of what a small next step for you might be, is reach out to us. We actually do a lot of purpose. I don't want to call it purpose walking. We help you find what your gifts are, how you are wired, stuff like that. And then we have plenty of opportunities for you to get involved, to be able to use some of those gifts.
And can help you find other places even if necessary.
Exactly.
I want to backtrack just a little bit because you talked about counseling, and I think that is such a crucial thing.
Right.
Bruce and Jake talked a little bit about it last week even, and how important counseling is. And
Yes.
and here's what I have found, that as I've talked to other people who have gone to counseling and things, is they go to a counselor once and they don't connect with the counselor.
Right.
And I would just say, don't stop there.
Right.
Find someone that you can connect with, that you have some kind of life experience with, that you say, okay, this guy gets me, or this woman gets me.
Yeah.
And so don't quit just because you go to one counselor and say, well, that just didn't work out.
Yeah, just to give you some encouragement with that, I tried 4 different counselors.
Right.
And I tried 6 different medications before I found the right counselor and the right medication. Now, I realize that not everyone is as motivated like that to say, okay, if number 3 doesn't work, I'm going to give up. I kid you not. There were thoughts like that, but I strongly encourage you to not give up in seeking the right help.
Right.
Yesterday I was having an off day. I was working from home, getting all of our media stuff figured out. And it was just a depressing day. Seasonal depression was in its fullest.
Right.
And I'd got up early, right on time. I had gone for a walk. I did my time alone with God. I was starting my workload, and I could not shake it. And at about 3:30, I'm like, you know what? I want to just go sleep. And I stopped myself. I'm like, no, I'm not going to give in to my depression. I'm going to go grab a media book that I'm reading on social media. I'm going to go outside, change the environment. I'm going to try again. And it was so incredible that, like, yeah, it was number 5 of things I had tried that day.
Yeah.
And that's when it worked. That's when my seasonal depression just went away.
And it's a fight.
It is. You've got to declare war.
Exactly. It goes back to that's part of declaring war. Is
Yeah.
I am going to beat this thing.
Yeah.
It's what my generation say. Hey, we're going to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we're going to get this done.
Which, honestly, that statement has a lot of negative connotations.
Right.
But when we're talking about mental health, and this coming from me, someone of the younger generation, you have to be willing to fight back.
Exactly.
Or you're going to surrender.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, surrendering for this is suicide.
Right.
And we believe that your life can continue on and you won't always feel this way.
Absolutely. So, for those who really don't struggle with thoughts of suicide, not only how do we recognize it, but how do we help those who do?
Right. And this is one, probably half of the viewers have struggled with passive or active ideation. The other half of the viewers are probably sitting in this corner.
Right.
Where I don't struggle with this.
I don't get it.
Yep.
I don't understand it. So, is it really even a real thing?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's one thing I'm just going to, my generation, us boomers, we just got to get over because it is a real thing.
Right.
There's no question about that.
Odds are you know someone without knowing
That is
necessarily
crucial.
that they struggle.
Yeah.
And that's where we hear all the stories all the time of, well, man, they always were happy,
Right.
They always
seemed-
yeah. Robin Williams
Robin Williams.
was a huge shock for so many people. Comedian,
Right.
brought so much joy and died by suicide. So odds are you probably know someone without knowing that you know, or you've known someone who has taken their life and you're struggling with this. And so here's a few things that you can do, whether you know that this person struggles. Here's some signs to look for, and that's step number 1. Okay, is to recognize the signs. Some of the more extreme signs that we know of are they're constantly talking about weapons or violence or even joking about taking their life, like, oh, I'm just going to go kill myself now. Most of the time, while there is definitely times when that joke occurs as just a joke.
Right.
Not saying that's right, but it does. There's a lot of times, though, that people use that language because it's natural to them.
There's an underlying process that they're thinking through.
Exactly. And so that's kind of the easy sign that you can recognize as well. Someone's talking about suicide, so they're obviously suicidal. Some of the less obvious ones are they start to pull away.
Right.
They're always sleeping. They are talking about depression. They're writing or drawing creative posts. And so actually back in May, I was doing a lot of depression posts. And one of our elders reached out to me and said, hey, my wife had just noticed this. Is this something you struggle with? I hadn't connected it at the time, but it just made me realize, like, wow, it is. And this person recognized that. And because they were willing to ask, it made me feel a little happy.
And don't be afraid to ask
Exactly.
those kind of questions. I think sometimes we withdraw and say, hey, I just don't want to get involved.
Right.
I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to. It's just a genuine care question.
Well, that's actually the second step, too, is to ask the question.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound like an aggressive question. I'll explain
Yeah.
it. But ask the question, have you considered killing yourself? And now that's really aggressive and you might cringe a little bit. But when I was going through mental health first aid training and they pooled quite a few teenagers with this question, the majority of them said that if an adult or really anybody were to ask them the question, have you considered killing yourself? They would be more honest in sharing their answer than if they were more passive about it.
Wow.
And so even though the language is much more sharp, individuals are much more likely to respond because something you have to realize is people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide, there's nothing pretty about it. Like, the language that you use isn't going to come across as a trigger word.
Right.
They're already being triggered by everything and just different sounds, different images, stuff like that. Asking a genuine question like, hey, I've noticed that you've been sleeping a lot during the day. Have you ever considered taking your life? Have you ever considered killing yourself? If I remember correctly, it was about 9 times out of 10, the teenagers, this was just youth, were more likely to answer honestly.
That's wild to me.
And so if you've got someone in your life, especially during seasonal depression time, that you've noticed pull away, create things that are dark, sleep a lot, their mood changes, stuff like that, you're not going to offend them by asking the question. After I lost my dad, a lot of people were scared to ask me, how are you doing since your dad passed? Because they didn't want to trigger those emotions. Right. We're constantly living with that grief.
Exactly.
You know?
And why not ask the question, even if it's a just in case scenario?
Right.
You know,
right.
You're going to feel a lot better about doing that.
And so this is then step number 3. If you're like, hey, I don't get it, I don't understand. After you've asked the question, lend a listening ear. Okay. This is so important. How we lend a listening ear, though, because a lot of times our empathy wants to fix things, okay?
Right.
When we hear someone that's hurting, we try to convince them that they're not, or that they shouldn't be, because our natural instinct is to fix things.
Or when we don't understand it,
yeah,
you know,
true.
Then you can't empathize. You know, you just got, again, it's one of those things of saying, hey, I don't understand this, but you are definitely going through something. So how do I do that? It's getting you into a different mindset.
And even then you could say, like, share with me how I can better walk with you.
Right.
Okay. A great way of active listening. But one thing not to do is don't guilt the person. Don't use guilt to try to get them out of suicidal thoughts.
Right.
So a lot of times what we've seen is think about all the people you'll be leaving behind. And that person probably has thought about all the people.
Exactly.
So a different way of asking a question similar to that is more helpful is there anybody in your life that you recognize who could walk with you during this time?
That's excellent.
Like, instead of saying, think of everyone you'll be leaving behind, you can ask the question of who can walk with you during this time.
And if it's dealing with loneliness or depression or something, having someone, just knowing that, hey, maybe there is someone coming alongside me, maybe there is, and you're starting to give a glimmer of hope. And
so then step number 4, if you have done all of these things and the person says, yeah, I've thought about killing myself, I actually know how I would do it, then it is so important for you to get them professional help.
Right.
Actually, if they're a teenager, then legally obligated to get the professional help. It's a lot trickier with adults, which is why I've struggled as a young adult pastor, because I've worked with people, not just here at Crossbridge, all over, who have struggled with suicide, and ultimately, unless they've got a gun in their hands, they have to make the choice themselves.
Right.
But I would make the options known to them, say, hey, we can get you checked into Parkview Behavioral Hospital right now, get you on 24-hour watch and get you on the right medication, counseling, and guess what? I'm going to be checking in on you. I'll be there every step of the way. I've learned that this is my generation's big struggle. And there's been, 4 or 5 times probably in the last 2 years that I've gone over to be with people who have either attempted to take their life.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but this is one of the things that honestly kind of shook me to the core. And I've never told you this before until right now. We were on a football field with one of our children, remember? And if you remember this, and he went to the bench in tears and basically said, I don't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
And watching you come alongside him and just walking through those questions and things. And this was what was he, a 3rd or 4th grader?
A very young kid.
A very young kid. And I'm thinking, it was a moment for me that wrecked me, to saying, I don't understand this, but I've got to understand it better.
That's a good way of wording it.
You know, and it's just, it's something that we cannot ignore, especially as a church. We have a hurting generations coming up.
Yeah.
And their hope is Jesus.
Exactly. And as we talk about this, now you gave me the chills as we're talking about this. If you're hurting right now, if you know someone that's hurting, or this is the first time that you've really dived in and said, hey, I want to learn something about this, we're proud of you. Like, we're so glad you're here. We're so glad that you are willing to help our community declare war against suicide, because it is not going away.
No.
And it's becoming much more accessible and an option. But just like what you just hit on, I truly believe that Jesus is King, Jesus is love, and the hope of the world in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that we struggled with going back inside or being online for this year is I pushed back a lot. I said, hey guys, I get the physical concern. I just want to make the mental health concern known too. And so, like, we want you to know, like, we're going through everything and all the possibilities, but or all the options of trying to be as safe about everything as possible. But what it all comes down to is there's a hope that you can have. Again, it does require, though, you to take some steps and to declare war.
Right.
and it can be really encouraging.
Yeah. Well, let's wind this whole thing down and just share a couple thoughts and a scripture here. This is out of Psalm 139. It says this, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." I just want to stop and say that understand that you are not a mistake. God knew you.
You're not a failure.
You're not a failure. God knew you from the very start. Okay? I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And it goes back to what we talked about is, I'm not worth anything. You are worth something. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in a secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body, all the days ordained for me. God had a purpose. All your days are ordained for you. They were written in your book before one of them came to be. And that's how much God knows you and cares for you and loves you. And he has a purpose for you.
Right.
And we want to be able to help you find that, because once you find that purpose, once you understand, hey, God has wired me for this. This is why I am here. It gives you that hope. It gives you that courage to pursue no matter what you're facing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that every single day you might have to wake up and declare a war against what you're struggling. And it's the same with weight issues. It's the same with stress or anxiety, with financial struggles. The battle we are in is for our lives, okay, literally and figuratively.
Yep.
You see, the devil is literally out to consume you.
And know that God knows that you're struggling with these things.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, even
Psalm 34.
Yes.
God is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And I was just reading, I think it was Luke 22, where Jesus is going into a town and he says, it's actually a second time I didn't realize that Jesus wept. I don't know if you caught this before. No. So Jesus is going into a community, and then Luke writes that he sees the brokenness in the community, how much sin they're chasing, and he weeps because of it.
Right.
And so this is, you're not struggling necessarily because of sin, but it's still that God cares so deeply for what we're struggling with, and his heart's broken.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what we wanted to do, I'm going to ask Brad to pray here in a second, but we really want to encourage you. The way you can declare war with this is, one, if you are struggling, don't be ashamed to reach out. It takes a lot of courage. We get that. And we're so proud of you for taking that step of faith. You can reach out to us by just going up to our Facebook Messenger and shooting us a private message. Or you can do so by reaching out to us at our email, admin, ADMIN, @crossbridgecommunity.org. And you can just say the words, "I'm struggling and need help." We'll be, moments notice, be able to walk with you.
Right.
And we want to walk with you.
Absolutely.
If you don't know someone who's struggling, or you don't know that you know, social media can be a really powerful thing, and you can actually gauge how people are feeling pretty well off social media. So you can either go on your Facebook and be more intent about looking at what people are posting, or you can just put a status that says, "Hey, if you are struggling right now and need to talk, shoot me a private message." It can go a long way.
Absolutely.
So, Brad, would you mind closing us in prayer?
Absolutely. Let's pray. Father, it's a tough subject, but we know so many are struggling with these thoughts of taking their own life. And so, Father, if there's anybody out here listening, I just pray that you give them the courage, you give them the strength to reach out to somebody, even us, and help us to walk through them, with them, God. And I just pray for those who are out here not realizing how serious this is, that maybe their eyes would be open and you just impress upon their heart that maybe there's someone in their life that they can come alongside, that they can ask some questions, they can have conversations. Father, just for those in this time of the year who are just struggling with anything from loneliness to anxiety, depression, to these thoughts of suicide, that you would bring people alongside of them. Would you help us to be able to not only know them, but become the church so that we can walk alongside them so that they can just be rescued and healed from this mental health issues that they are dealing with. Father, we are so grateful that that you pressed upon our heart to do this series, and we just are going to rejoice when people are on the mend, that people are doing better in life. And we give you all the praise and the glory for it. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.